panel appointed by the King of Bahrain is starting its inquiry into the protests which left more than 30 dead earlier this year. Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa set up the fact-finding mission following diplomatic pressure and says it's, quote, completely independent and consists of international experts. Well, the panel will be headed by legal professor CHERIF BASSIOUNI. He's a US-based UN war crimes expert and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in international criminal justice. Nigel Rodley is a British lawyer and professor and a member of the UN Human Rights Committee. He also headed the legal office at Amnesty International. Philippe KIRSCH is a Canadian lawyer who was a judge on the International Criminal Court and was the court's first president. The Iranian lawyer Manoush Afsanjani has worked as a senior UN legal officer, and BADRIA AL-AWADHI is a Kuwaiti lawyer. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Charles Stratford, who reported extensively from Bahrain during the protests and the subsequent crackdown. Charles, thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us. So, how credible is this panel? I mean, we heard they can sound quite senior. How credible is the panel?
Well, as you were saying, certainly on paper, they've got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge there, and certainly they sound very credible as individuals, but obviously there's quite a lot of scepticism about how credible in fact they are, because the panel was set up by the King, and this was after repeated efforts by other groups to come in and do independent investigations, and they were denied access. But I've been looking at some of their pledges in terms of what they in fact are going to say, or they say they're going to be investigating. They say they're going to be looking at the period between February and March, when we saw the protests, the initial part of the crackdown on the protests. They say that they're a fact-finding mission, that they're going to be given access to government files, to all government agencies, to officials. We're talking about police records and so on here. They say they're going to have complete access to victims and witnesses, and they've promised secrecy according to international human rights norms for anyone who's come forward, who wants to come forward. So, as I say, on paper, the experiences there and the pledges of what they say they're going to do seem quite credible. So
what about the protesters who've been involved in some of this in the past? Have they received it?
The protesters that I've spoken to and the Bahrain-based human rights groups that I've spoken to are wholly sceptical of how independent this group is and how they're going to really be able to work. You know, we're talking about elements of trust and fear here that have been, certainly the trust element has been absolutely shattered over recent months. Certainly when I was reporting there, people were so terrified that interviews were done when mobile phones were taken to pieces because people were afraid of phone tapping. Any kind of communication between myself and sources was done through BlackBerry Messenger. They weren't even prepared to use normal text messaging technology. They're also concerned about there possibly not being enough time. You know, we're not just looking at allegations of torture, allegations of false confessions. There are also allegations of thousands of people having been sacked for participating in the protests. We're looking at mosque destruction, the destruction of religious buildings, and there's also that question of what exact period we're going to be looking at here as well. They say it's the February and March period, but certainly I was back in May and I witnessed the crackdown continuing. So
I mean, let's assume that they do their job and kind of get all the information that you said that they're sort of entitled supposedly to get. How much clout do they then have? I mean, what sort of teeth do they have if they find that, you know, the government has been at fault? What can they do?
Well, they say they're going to submit a report of recommendations on October the 30th again, so that's not that far away. And they say that in this final report they will make these recommendations. They say that they will present what they describe as a complete narrative of events. They say that they're going to describe the acts of violence, the circumstances of detentions. They will look into things like the demolition of religious buildings. And interestingly enough, with respect to us as journalists, they're also going to look at allegations that there was media harassment. Now, certainly with respect to Al Jazeera, there most definitely was. I mean, the reason why we're not actually at this panel and seeing what's going on today is because after repeated attempts to get there and applications to the government, we're still not being allowed in. So that's obviously an interesting case in point for the coverage by the media.
OK, Charles Stratford, thanks very much indeed for bringing us the latest there on that commission. Thank you.